I recently reviewed the 31-inch Jakks-specific C-3PO figure, and while I'm a fan of their big figs in general, this one seemed like a bit of a missed opportunity. While the sculpt is mostly good, in person the gold plastic looks just kind of cheap. So I decided to repaint it. Naturally, I decided to make it an original trilogy version complete with silver leg. One good point about having so many screws in the back is that they didn't use any glue at all to assemble it, so you can easily take it apart. You might want to brace yourself for this one, 3PO. You could probably repaint it without taking it apart, and I would do that if parts were glued instead of being screwed together, but it's so easy to do it in this case that I don't think there's any reason not to. Be careful of these parts, which are just sort of sandwiched between the two halves of the upper leg. Some parts don't need to be disassembled at all, though, like the lower legs. Once I had them disassembled, I took a 320 grit sanding sponge and just lightly sanded all of the exposed surfaces. The plastic is very smooth and glossy, so I think this gives the paint something to grab onto. Here you can see how a little sanding removes the gloss and makes it a bit rough to the touch. Here are all the pieces sanded and ready. Probably took a little over an hour to do this. Looks a bit like a murder scene, actually. I also used blue painter's tape to mask off the inner parts of the joints, like you see here in the shoulder, since getting paint there might affect the movement of the joints. Next, I primed all of the parts black. This gives me a uniform surface for the paint to adhere to, and I also find that metallic paints generally look better when painted over black. I then masked off the stomach section, since that was going to be mostly black anyway. I got a lot of metallic Krylon paints on clearance recently, so I decided to try this 18 karat gold premium metallic paint. Sounds good, right? And the cap would lead you to believe that it's a shiny gold finish, but in reality it was just a light yellow gold that was barely metallic at all. You can't always tell how things look until they dry, so I gave it a chance, but this one just wasn't doing it for me, so I decided to redo it using this regular Krylon metallic gold paint. You may not be able to tell it here, but it's significantly darker and more reflective than the other paint, so it seems like it's a good choice for 3PO. It's not a chrome finish, but those can be tricky, and I knew I wanted to weather it anyway, so I didn't really need that. I was a bit worried that painting one gold finish on top of another might lead to problems of some kind, but it actually went on very nicely. You should look at the instructions on the can and make sure you wait long enough for it to dry. Reassembling the figure wasn't too hard, but it can be a bit tricky to snap all the pieces back together. Oh, for the silver leg, I used this premium metallic original chrome, which actually worked out very well. Here you can see the figure before weathering and detailing. It looks pretty good in this photo, but in person it's a bit flat looking, so I probably wouldn't want to leave it this way, although it is a big improvement over the original already. For his eyes, I decided it wasn't necessary to try and replicate a glowing look, so I just gave it a black wash, that's watered down black paint. It really brings out the details, and I think it looks great. For the silver leg, I applied black paint to it and then just wiped it off with a paper towel after letting it dry for a minute or two. You might have to do it a couple of times to get the look you want, but it's quite easy to do and it really helps bring out the details. For the rest of the body, I used brown paint in the same way. This not only brings out the details of the sculpt, but also functions as a kind of weathering. It's surprising how effective this is without requiring much work or talent. By the way, I considered filling in the screw holes, but that would have made the project a lot more difficult and time-consuming, and I really wanted something that would be easy to do and quick. In case you're wondering, I put the bubble wrap beneath him here to make sure the paint on the other side didn't get scratched while I was working on him. You could also use a towel or something for this. The wires on his stomach were the only part requiring any real painting. I first painted all of the wires white, since trying to paint yellow or red over black just doesn't work well. It turns out that the colors of the wires changes from film to film, with The Force Awakens being the most colorful. The original trilogy versions seem to use mostly yellow, white, and red, so that's what I did, but I also added one green and one blue wire just as accents. Here I'm adding a black wash over the colored wires just to give it a little bit more three-dimensionality. And that's it. So to review, this is what it looked like originally, and this is the finished custom version. This took maybe a day and a half to do, but it made a dramatic difference in the appearance of the figure. It went from being my least favorite of the Jakks-specific figures to my favorite. I actually think it compares very favorably to statues costing many times as much. I do think I'm going to have to weather the R2-D2 figure now, though, so they'll look better when displayed together. I complained in my review of the head sculpt being a little bit wonky, but even that doesn't really stand out when the paint is better. It's a bit too bad that this figure doesn't look better right off the shelf, because the sculpt is actually really solid, but at least it's not all that difficult to improve. Do you think you might try a project like this sometime? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.